Leora Voss was neck-deep in the dreamscape, a virtual reality wonderland that looked a lot less like a fantasy and more like a bureaucratic nightmare designed by someone who failed art school twice, maybe thrice. The sky was a shade of gray that could only be described as corporate chic, and the buildings around her seemed to be carved from the collective boredom of 1,000 office workers. All perfect for an alien corporate domain if one wanted to induce instant existential dread. Great! Another day, another soul-sucking experience, Leora muttered to herself, adjusting her neural interface. It was a small, unobtrusive device clamped to the back of her neck, which was probably the only thing keeping her from a complete brain meltdown, or from having to listen to the elevator music looping incessantly in this virtual hell. She walked with purpose, or as much purpose as one could muster, while navigating past virtual cubicles filled with beings that didn't even bother to look interesting. An alien resembling a pile of sentient moss shuffled past, clutching a datapad. Leora wondered if its job was as dull as it looked, or if it was just pretending. She hoped for the latter. Everyone needed a hobby. Her mission, because the universe can't resist slapping humans with dubious tasks, was simple: infiltrate the alien corporate domain and gather intel on whatever new doomsday device the board, a group of aliens who probably held monthly meetings about the best way to ruin the galaxy, was cooking up. Just another Tuesday, she sighed, glancing at a holographic map. Her destination was a restricted sector ominously labeled Research and Development, because that's not suspicious at all, right? As she slipped past a security checkpoint, thankfully, alien tech was as user-friendly as a two-headed porcupine. She couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. Maybe it was the way the walls seemed to close in on her, or the fact that the air smelled faintly like burnt toast. Either way, she wasn't paid enough for this. Should have been an accountant, she grumbled, sidestepping a virtual janitor scrubbing a floor that probably hadn't been dirty since the Big Bang. Finally, she reached the R&D sector, and it was every bit as foreboding as she'd imagined. The doors were huge, metallic, and locked tighter than a miser's purse. Her heart raced as she hacked her way in, each second feeling like an Eeyore spent on hold with intergalactic customer service. Inside, the room was dimly lit, and she could feel her skin crawling with the sensation of being watched. Or maybe that was just the effect of standing in a place that probably had more hidden cameras than a reality TV show. "Well, this is cozy," she whispered, moving towards the central console. Her fingers deftly tapped at the controls, bypassing firewalls like a bored teenager hacking their school's Wi-Fi. And there it was, the subjugator. The name alone was enough to induce a chuckle. Leave it to aliens to come up with something that sounded like a villain straight out of a comic book. The device looked innocuous enough, little more than a glorified flash drive. But according to the data she skimmed, it was designed to induce overwhelming despair in its targets, immobilizing them in their own misery. She couldn't help but see the irony. In a world where most folks were already drowning in existential dread, the subjugator seemed almost redundant. "Congratulations, you've invented depression," she murmured sarcastically, saving the data onto her own device. A sudden noise snapped her from her thoughts, a low, mechanical hum growing louder. "Time to skedaddle," she said, turning on her heel with all the grace of a cat burglar who'd just stepped on a squeaky toy. As she made her escape, she couldn't resist one last quip to the empty room. "Nice try, but humanity's been depressing itself just fine for centuries." The corridor outside was as eerily empty as she'd left it. Leora hurried back the way she came, her mind racing faster than her feet. She had what she needed, evidence of the subjugator and its absurd purpose. Now all she needed to do was get out without ending up as a cautionary tale. Her neural interface buzzed, signaling an incoming communication. She tapped it with a sigh, expecting the worst. "Voss, you in position," the voice of her handler crackled through, a comforting mix of irritation and concern. Yeah, got what we need. Heading out now, she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Good. And Voss, what? She asked while continuing to jog down the corridor, hoping she wouldn't trip over anything inconvenient like her own feet. Don't screw this up, she chuckled dryly. Wouldn't dream of it. With the exit in sight, she couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. Aliens, doomsday devices, and here she was, a human who still hadn't figured out how to file taxes without crying, saving the day. But that's humanity for you. Unpredictable, scrappy, and more than a little sarcastic about the whole business of galactic survival. As she reached the door, she felt a brief pang of guilt for leaving the dreamscape without saying goodbye to the moss creature. Maybe next time. She stepped through the exit, her mission complete, her spirits oddly high despite the existential dread machine clutched in her hand. Because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's laughing in the face of certain doom. Just another Tuesday, she repeated to herself, stepping into the light of the virtual realm's exit, ready for whatever sarcastic remark destiny had in store next. Leora Voss was doing her best impression of a ghost. There she was, a specter haunting the alien corporation's virtual halls in the dreamscape, clutching the data equivalent of a bomb wrapped in a brown paper bag. It seemed almost comical how easy it had been to infiltrate this place. But, as with most things in life, the easy part was over. Now came the fun. She moved down the corridor with the kind of urgency that said, "Yeah, I definitely just stole your top-secret doomsday device plans, and no, I'm not sticking around for tea." The fluorescent lights above flickered, though whether it was intentional or a sign of the dreamscape's inherent dysfunction was anyone's guess. Either way, it was doing wonders for her sense of impending doom. Her neural interface buzzed again. This time it wasn't a friendly voice. No, this one was decidedly more mechanical, and not in the let's be pals kind of way. "Intruder detected," it chirped, in a tone that could only be described as cheerfully homicidal. "Engaging security protocols." "Great," Leora muttered, quickening her pace. Nothing like a good chase to get the blood pumping, right? She'd been needing to up her cardio anyway. The dreamscape around her shifted, the environment reconfiguring itself like some absurd, dystopian Rubik's Cube. Walls morphed and twisted, forming barriers where once there were none. It was a bit like being inside a funhouse, if the funhouse was designed by someone with a grudge against humanity. "Okay, dreamscape, let's see what you've got," Leora challenged, darting through a newly appeared doorway that seemed to defy several laws of physics. Somewhere, an architect was having a stroke. Behind her, the alien response team, likely more sentient moss piles with a penchant for bureaucracy, was closing in. They'd been alerted to her presence, and she had about as much chance of talking her way out of this as a cat convincing a mouse it was just there for a friendly chat. Security bots, or whatever the aliens called their mechanical bloodhounds, were on her tail. They were less cuddly than the moss creatures, constructed from a mix of jagged edges and bad intentions. They came whirring and clicking, clearly designed by someone who watched too many action holovids. Leora ducked into an alcove, fingers flying over her neural interface, attempting to throw them off her trail. Come on," she muttered, feeling the sweat trickle down her back. She needed to lose them before they cornered her and asked uncomfortable questions like, "Why are you here? And could you refrain from stealing classified documents?" The dreamscape shifted again, the whole virtual landscape trembling as if it had a heartbeat, or a really bad case of indigestion. The corridor ahead elongated, stretching like taffy, a trick to disorient and deter. Leora wasn't buying it. She sprinted forward, every muscle humming with the primal thrill of flight. She rounded a corner, nearly plowing into a virtual filing cabinet that had no business existing in any reality, virtual or otherwise. "Who designs these places?" she huffed, narrowly avoiding an existential trip into digital paperwork hell. The security bots weren't far behind, their mechanical limbs clattering against the metallic floor. They sounded like a death metal band warming up, and she wasn't keen on sticking around for the main performance. Leora smirked as she passed a cluster of holographic plants that didn't need watering, sunlight, or, apparently, a sense of decorum. "Nice garden. Very minimalist," she quipped, knowing full well that sarcasm was wasted on the bots. Her neural interface buzzed again, another warning that the security lockdown was in effect. The dreamscape was starting to constrict, like a digital boa squeezing its prey. Any minute now, it would choke off her escape routes. She skidded to a halt in front of another set of looming doors, marked ominously with alien script that probably translated to something like "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Without a second thought, she hacked into the control panel, the doors sliding open just as the bots rounded the corner, red lights flashing like the world's least friendly disco. Diving through, she slammed the panel behind her, locking it tight. A temporary reprieve. The room she'd entered was vast, cavernous, the walls lined with screens displaying data streams that would have made an accountant weep with joy or despair. "Welcome to the nerve center," Leora breathed, taking it all in. This was the heart of the dreamscape, the place where all the virtual threads came together. If she could disrupt it, it might buy her the time she needed to escape. Her fingers danced across the nearest console, attempting to weave a digital spell that would confuse the entire system. Yet, for all her bravado, she knew she was playing with fire. The aliens had the home advantage, and she was just a visitor overstaying her welcome. A sudden blare of alarms made her flinch. The bots were attempting to override the lock, their programming relentless and their patience non-existent. "Persistent little buggers, aren't you?" she muttered, typing faster. Behind her, a screen flickered to life, displaying an alien visage that could only be described as extremely displeased. Its gelatinous features twisted into something resembling a frown, or maybe it was hunger. Hard to tell with aliens. "Human," it intoned, its voice echoing through the chamber like a verdict being passed. "Cease your actions and surrender." Leora snorted, glancing over her shoulder. "Surrender? Sorry, I left my white flag in my other space suit." "You cannot escape," the alien continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "The dreamscape is our domain." "You are an intruder." "Yeah, I'm getting that vibe." Leora returned her attention to the console, desperately trying to create a backdoor in the system. She'd seen enough heist holodramas to know this is the part where the hero makes the impossible leap, or falls flat on their face. The room trembled as the dreamscape altered its configuration once more. It was trying to trap her, like a predator closing in. Leora could almost admire the dedication, if it hadn't been aimed at her imminent capture. "All right, Voss," she muttered to herself, fingers flying. "Time to pull a rabbit out of this virtual hat." With a final keystroke, she initiated a cascade of chaos within the system, hoping it would be enough to throw the alien tech off balance. The lights flickered, the screens blared gibberish, and the sound of malfunctioning machinery filled the air, a symphony of digital panic. She allowed herself a moment to savor the small victory. "Take that, you overgrown slime molds," she taunted, already moving towards the nearest exit. It wouldn't hold them off for long, but she was betting on just long enough. The door slid open, revealing a corridor filled with shifting, abstract patterns. The dreamscape was glitching, the carefully crafted environment now a kaleidoscope of distorted visuals. She sprinted through the chaos, the surreal landscape mirroring the mess in her head. Behind her, the sound of the bots grew distant, their signals lost amidst the digital noise. It was a beautiful cacophony, the kind that spelled freedom if she could just make it to the end. Her neural interface buzzed with a new alert, this one friendly. "Voss, you there?" "Still alive, barely," she panted, skidding around a corner that bent in a way corners really shouldn't. "Got a little tied up with the locals. Get to the extraction point." "We're ready for you." "Music to my ears," Leora replied, dodging another security measure that sputtered into life. It seemed her impromptu system crash was having some delightful side effects. The corridor ahead ended abruptly in a wall of static, the dreamscape struggling to maintain its form. Beyond it lay freedom, or at least the promise of it. She could almost taste the stale, recycled air of her ship. With a final push, she dove through the static, feeling the dreamscape dissolve around her. The last thing she heard was the enraged cry of the alien security, drowning in a sea of corrupted data. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, and she found herself in the cramped confines of her ship. The neural interface disengaged with a hiss, the sensation akin to waking from a particularly vivid dream or nightmare. Her handler's voice crackled through the comms, laced with relief. "Glad you made it. Got a nice little welcoming committee ready to debrief you on your grand theft escapade." Leora chuckled, leaning back and letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Tell them to take a number. I've got a priority. Shower, coffee, and then maybe I'll consider saving the galaxy again." "Copy that," her handler replied, humor evident even over the static. "Welcome back, Voss." As she powered down the systems, Leora allowed herself a small grin. Once again, humanity had snatched survival from the jaws of probable doom and lived to tell the tale with just the right mix of sarcasm and shade. Because if there was one thing the universe should have learned by now, it was this: never count out the underdog, especially when she has a knack for making the impossible just another day's work. Leora leaned back in her ship's cramped cockpit and glanced over at the ceiling with a mixture of exasperation and relief. The same ceiling tiles she'd seen 1,000 times before, still stained, still kind of comforting. It was like coming home to a pet that refused to learn any tricks but was always there to greet you. The neural interface had left a tingling residue in her brain, like the aftertaste of a bad decision. Her comms crackled to life again, much like a drunk at a bar who didn't know when to quit. "Hey, Leora, you planning to nap on that ship, or should we expect you sometime this century? Keep your pants on, Finch," Leora replied, rubbing her temples. "I just tangoed with a digital monster and lived to tell the tale. I think I'm entitled to a few minutes." "Sure, take all the time you need," Finch's voice dripped with sarcasm. "It's not like the fate of humanity hangs in the balance or anything." "Touché," she conceded, flicking switches with mechanical precision. The ship's engines purred to life, the vibration a comforting lullaby of impending doom. Every flicker of light on the console reminded her that somewhere in the universe, there were people who actually knew how to fix this stuff. Sadly, none of them were here to help her. The hangar bay of the Resistance's base loomed into view, all angular shadows and greasy metal. It somehow managed to look both welcoming and like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie, the kind that didn't end well for most of the cast. Her landing wasn't the smoothest, but it got the job done. If the ship had feelings, it would probably hold a grudge. As she descended the ramp, Finch was there to greet her, a wiry figure with a perpetual smirk that suggested everything was a private joke. "You look like hell," he greeted her, arms folded casually. "And you look like you've been waiting all day to say something useless," Leora shot back, her lips twisting into a smile despite herself. He waved her forward. "Come on, the council's waiting. They're eager to hear you spin this one." Inside the command center, a haphazard collection of cobbled-together tech and worn-out faces awaited. The council, such as it was, consisted of people who had once been engineers, diplomats, and one ex-bartender who'd turned out to have a knack for strategy. They huddled around a central table, its surface littered with maps, data pads, and empty coffee mugs. "Ah, Voss," said Jorak, the de facto leader, a barrel-chested man who looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. "Glad to see you made it out in one piece." Mostly, Leora agreed, plopping herself into a chair that creaked ominously. "I brought you a souvenir." She handed over the data chip containing the stolen plans, a prize wrapped in virtual thorns. Jorak took the chip like it was a loaded gun. "What are we looking at?" "Doomsday device plans," Leora replied, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "A little something the aliens cooked up to ruin everyone's day." The room fell silent, the kind of heavy silence that usually precedes bad news or worse jokes. "Great," said Arla, the ex-bartender turned strategist. Her sense of sarcasm was as sharp as a bartender's wit at last call. So just another Tuesday then. Jorek inserted the chip into the central computer, the holographic display flickering to life. The room was bathed in a cold blue glow as the plans unfolded before them, a digital spider web of destruction. Subjugator, Jorek read aloud, squinting at the alien script. Sounds friendly, like a hug from a black hole, Finch added. Arla leaned forward, examining the schematics with a frown. We need to take this thing offline. Yesterday. Easier said than done, Leora interjected, crossing her arms. This isn't some weekend DIY project. It's alien tech and it doesn't come with a user manual. Does anything? Finch muttered. The council pored over the plans, a chorus of murmurs and grimaces. The scale of alien influence was daunting, tendrils of control reaching into every sector of known space. They were like termites in a wooden house, unseen until it was too late. All right, Jorek said, straightening up, we need a plan to counteract this. Suggestions. We could try diplomacy, Arla suggested with a straight face. The room's collective groan served as the laugh track for her deadpan delivery. Or we could sabotage their operation, Finch offered. Hit them hard where it hurts. In the wallet, Leora quipped. Because I'm pretty sure they've got enough to cover the damage. The room was long on sarcasm, short on actionable plans. But that was the nature of their resistance, improvisation and audacity. We'll need a team to get in, Jorek mused, rubbing his chin. Find out where the subjugator is being built and stop it before it goes active. Piece of cake, Leora said. If the cake were made of explosives and guarded by homicidal robots, Finch flashed her a grin. Sounds like your specialty. Leora leaned back with a sigh. I do have a knack for getting into places I shouldn't be. And the scars to prove it. The room buzzed with a renewed sense of urgency, ideas flowing like caffeine in an overworked bloodstream. They were planning an assault, a desperate gambit to tip the scales. It was reckless, bold, and utterly human. As the meeting wound down, Leora caught Arla's eye. You really think we can do this? She asked, a rare note of uncertainty in her voice. Honestly, Arla replied, her gaze steady. I think we have to try. Otherwise, what's the point? Fair enough, Leora conceded. I've always been a fan of impossible odds. With the council dismissed, Leora found herself wandering through the base's narrow corridors, the weight of the mission pressing down like gravity on a bad day. The walls were plastered with faded posters and graffiti, a testament to every hope and frustration that had passed through this place. She ended up in the rec room, a Spartan space with a few battered sofas and a holo screen. Finch was there, fiddling with a deck of cards, the universal time killer. Feeling lucky? He asked without looking up. Luck's for the unprepared, Leora replied, dropping into a chair. Besides, I used all mine up getting out of the dreamscape. Finch dealt out a few cards, face down. We're really doing this, huh? Seems like it, Leora said, picking up her hand and frowning at the unfamiliar symbols. These cards better not be rigged. Would I do that to you? Yes, she replied without hesitation. He laughed, the sound genuine and bright against the gloom. True. But these aren't, promise. They played in silence for a while, the kind of companionable quiet that speaks louder than words. Outside, the universe continued spinning its chaotic web, uncaring of the tiny specks plotting their rebellion. Eventually, Finch broke the silence. You nervous? Only when I'm awake, Leora answered, tossing a card onto the table. But nerves keep you sharp. Alive, you know, I've always wondered why you signed up for this, Finch said, his tone more serious. You had other options. Believe it or not, I wanted to make a difference, Leora replied, her eyes fixed on the cards. Besides, who else would keep you in line? True, he chuckled, discarding his own card. You've got your work cut out for you. They played another round, the stakes unspoken but deeply felt. It was more than a game. It was an affirmation of life, of defiance in the face of annihilation. When Leora finally stood to leave, Finch gave her a mock salute. See you at the next briefing. Try not to get yourself killed before then. I'll make it a priority, she promised, rolling her eyes. See you, Finch. Back in the corridors, Leora felt the familiar pull of purpose. The mission loomed ahead, a monstrous challenge that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outrageously confident, just how she liked it. In the end, it wasn't about winning. It was about standing up and refusing to be crushed under the alien heel. That was the heart of the resistance, the spark that refused to go out. Leora headed to her quarters, her mind already racing with plans and contingencies. This was the life she'd chosen, and despite the odds, she wouldn't have it any other way. As she lay down to catch a few precious hours of sleep, she couldn't help but smile. Another day, another impossible mission. Another chance to prove that humanity still had some fight left. Even in a universe designed to swallow hope, sometimes the underdog managed to bite back. The ship's engines grumbled like a hangover on a Monday morning, dragging its metal carcass through the ink-black void. Leora tightened her fingers around the ship's controls, the neural interface whispering sweet nothings in the back of her mind. Or maybe that was just the early signs of madness. Hard to tell these days. Finch lounged in the co-pilot's seat, feet kicked up on the console because, naturally, he was the picture of professionalism. "You know," he said, flicking a stray bolt across the floor, "this plan of yours is the kind of thing that makes a suicide mission look like a vacation." "Relax," Leora replied, eyes locked on the holographic map plotting their course. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Besides the obvious death and destruction, I mean." The comms crackled to life, cutting through their banter with all the charm of a rusty chainsaw. "This is Jax Ardent," the voice drawled, dripping with the kind of confidence only idiots and geniuses possess. "Hope you're ready. We hit the dreamscape in 15. Jax Ardent, the strategist with the tactical mind of a chess master and the social skills of a brick. If anyone could orchestrate chaos and call it strategy, it was him. Finch rolled his eyes, a gesture he'd perfected over countless briefings. 15 minutes to launch an assault on an alien fortress. Who does Jax think we are, miracle workers? Lucky for him, Leora smirked. We're not in short supply of those right now. The crew rallied in the ship's cramped main area, a motley assortment of grizzled resistance fighters and fresh recruits still wet behind the ears. They looked like they'd been pulled from a zero-budget action movie, all mismatched armor and questionable hygiene. "Listen up," Leora announced, pulling everyone's attention. "In a few minutes, we're going to introduce the aliens to good old-fashioned human stubbornness. Jax has pinpointed a weak spot in their dreamscape defenses. Our job is to hit it hard and fast, turn this place inside out before they even know what hit him." A young recruit raised a hand hesitantly. "And what if they do know what hit him? Then we improvise," Leora replied with a shrug. "We've all seen how well their tech integrates with ours like nails on a chalkboard. Use that to our advantage. Make some noise, break some stuff." Finch leaned in, his grin as sharp as a knife. "And if that fails, run like hell and hope they trip over their own tentacles trying to catch us." Laughter rippled through the group, a mix of nerves and genuine mirth. Because what else could you do when staring down the barrel of almost certain doom? The ship approached the dreamscape's perimeter, the virtual fortress shifting like a bad acid trip. Leora's fingers danced over the controls, guiding them closer to the breach point Jax had identified. She could feel the dreamscape's security protocols probing at the edges of her consciousness, like a mosquito that just wouldn't quit. "All right, here we go," she muttered, initiating the assault sequence. Alarms blared to life as the ship breached the dreamscape's defenses, a cacophony of electronic screams and digital wails. The team scrambled into action, weapons at the ready. The ship's hold opened, disgorging its payload of human defiance into the heart of the alien digital realm. Inside the dreamscape, reality bent and twisted like a drunk ballerina. Walls shifted, floors rose and fell like waves, and the air crackled with energy. But Leora and her team had been here before. They knew the drill. Keep moving, stay unpredictable, and for the love of whatever God still tolerated them, don't stop. "Remember, folks," Finch's voice crackled over the comms. Lag is the enemy. Let's keep it tight and show these aliens why you never underestimate a species that invented reality TV. The team surged forward, navigating the shifting corridors with a mix of practiced precision and sheer bloody-minded determination. Alien security drones materialized like bad ideas, but the humans were already past, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. Leora led the charge, neural interface buzzing in her brain like a particularly persistent hornet. The subjugator was active, its presence a dark cloud looming over the dreamscape. Yet, strangely enough, her mind remained clear, her thoughts unclouded by the alien device's influence. Anyone else feeling just peachy? She radioed back to the team, weaving through a corridor that reconfigured itself mid-step. Peachy? Finch replied, his voice tinged with the incredulity of someone being asked to operate heavy machinery while blindfolded. Let's not get carried away, Voss. A snort of laughter echoed through the comms, probably Arla, the ex-bartender with a penchant for gallows humor. Maybe the subjugator doesn't know what to do with us, she suggested. We're too stupid to be properly subdued. Works for me, Leora quipped, skidding to a halt as they reached their target. The subjugator's control nexus loomed before them, an ominous mass of alien tech that looked more like a bad sculpture than a doomsday device. Finch set to work, fingers flying over the control interface. Let's see if we can give them a taste of their own medicine, he murmured, his focus total. Got any bright ideas, Finch? Leora asked, scanning the corridors for incoming hostiles. Just one, he replied, grinning like a man who'd found the last piece of a particularly irritating puzzle. Blow it up and hope for the best. The team got to work, rigging charges and improvising as they went. The dreamscape's defenses closed in, but the humans were slippery as eels, ducking and weaving with the kind of reckless abandon only desperation could fuel. As the final charge was set, Leora took a breath, adrenaline singing in her veins. Time to make ourselves scarce, she called, motioning for the team to fall back. The escape was a blur, a cacophony of gunfire, shouted commands, and the ever-present hum of the neural interface. They burst back into reality just as the charges detonated, a cascade of light and sound that sent shockwaves through the dreamscape. Leora twisted the ship away from the crumbling fortress, the engines screaming their protest. The alien defenses scrambled in disarray, a beautiful, chaotic mess that sent a thrill down her spine. Well, that went better than expected, Finch remarked, sliding into the co-pilot's seat as they broke free of the dreamscape's grasp. Maybe we should have expected worse, Leora shot back, adrenaline still coursing through her. Let's hope Jax has a next step lined up. The ship's comms crackled to life once more, Jax's voice cutting through the static like a blade. Nice work, team. The subjugator's control has been disrupted, but we need to regroup and figure out our next move. Regroup? Finch echoed, arching an eyebrow. After this, I was thinking more along the lines of a vacation. Dream on, Leora laughed, steering them back toward the Resistance base. We've got a galaxy to save. As the ship raced toward safety, Leora allowed herself a moment of reflection. The subjugator might still be active, but they'd managed to buy some time. And in a universe that seemed hell-bent on destruction, time was as valuable as any weapon. Back at the base, the atmosphere was electric, a heady mix of relief and anticipation. The Resistance had landed a blow, but the fight was far from over. Leora disembarked to a chorus of cheers and weary smiles, her team trailing behind her like the heroes of an underdog story that had miraculously avoided a tragic ending. Jax was waiting, arms crossed, and an uncharacteristically broad grin on his face. Nice work, Voss. Looks like your team can handle a little chaos. Chaos is our middle name, Leora replied, accepting a cup of something vile masquerading as coffee from Arla. What's next on the agenda? We need to study the data we pulled from the dreamscape, Jax explained, leading the way to the command center. Figure out why the subjugator didn't affect you and your team like it did the others. Maybe we're just special, Finch suggested, only half joking. Or maybe there's something about human brains that gives us a fighting chance, Leora countered, the gears in her mind already turning. The command center buzzed with activity, screens flickering with data as the text poured over the information retrieved from the dreamscape. The alien influence was vast, a web of intrigue and destruction that spanned the galaxy. As Leora settled in to watch the analysis unfold, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was small, a candle in a hurricane, but it was there. Whatever it is, she said, turning to Finch, we have to find a way to use it. Turn the tables and show these aliens we're not going down without a fight. Finch nodded, his trademark smirk firmly in place. Always knew you were an optimist at heart, Voss. Let's not get carried away, Leora replied, sipping her coffee and grimacing at the taste. We've still got a long way to go. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and impossible odds, but Leora wouldn't have it any other way. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was defying expectations, even when the universe seemed determined to swallow them whole. And with that thought, Leora dove back into the fray, ready to take the fight to the aliens, one sarcastic quip at a time. The dreamscape was falling apart like a second-hand junker in zero gravity, but Leora Voss was too busy dodging debris and existential dread to really appreciate the irony. She piloted the ship with a mix of skill and sheer bloody-mindedness, riding the chaos with a grin that was part exhilaration, part grimace. In the cockpit, Finch was working the controls like a man who'd bet his last credit on a losing horse, his sarcasm a constant companion that kept despair at bay. Next time we decide to take on an alien fortress, remind me to bring a bigger stick, Finch quipped, his fingers dancing over the flickering interface. Next time, Leora shot back, wrenching the ship around a corner that wasn't there a second ago. I'm hoping this is a one-time thing. Hope and a blaster will get you a corpse, Finch said with a shrug, eyes on the holographic map that was currently resembling a toddler's finger painting more than a tactical layout. Behind them, the crew was strapped in and hanging onto sanity by their fingernails. Arla, ever the source of gallows humor, piped up over the comms. Just think of it as an advanced roller coaster, with more screaming and less safety. Great, Jack's ardent replied, voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. I always wanted to die on a theme park ride. The dreamscape shuddered around them, alien architecture reconfiguring itself as if to crush this unwelcome intrusion. Leora's neural interface buzzed with warnings, the electronic equivalent of a screaming toddler in a restaurant. She gritted her teeth against the surge of unwelcome memories, flashes of a past she'd rather forget. It hit her like a wrecking ball, a sensory overload that threw her back to the trenches of her past. A battlefield where the air was thick with smoke and fear, where comrades fell faster than she could keep track. The cacophony of war, the sting of betrayal, Leora had worn those memories like armor, a shield against a world that demanded she be someone else. And now they were her lifeline. Leora. Finch's voice yanked her back to the present, the cockpit's harsh reality replacing the ghosts of yesteryears. Stay with us, yeah. You're the only thing keeping this bucket from turning into a fireworks show, she blinked, shaking off the remnants of the flashback. Yeah, just had a flashback. No big deal, a flashback. Finch raised an eyebrow. You're full of surprises, Voss. Tell that to my shrink, she muttered, hauling the ship back into the fray. But the realization had settled in her gut like a weight. Somehow her past trauma had shielded her from the subjugator's influence, and it might be the only reason they were still alive. All right, team, Jax's voice crackled over the comms, pulling them back to the present. We need to regroup and figure out how to turn this to our advantage. Advantage. Arla chimed in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. We're about to be alien sushi, and you're talking advantage. Optimism's never been your strong suit, has it? Jax replied, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. Let's just focus on not dying, shall we? Leora suggested, twisting the ship through another impossibly tight space. If I wanted to get vaporized, I'd have stayed in retail. Their laughter was strained, an attempt to stave off the creeping despair that clawed at the edges of consciousness. Because in that moment, with the dreamscape closing in like the universe's worst hug, hope was a flimsy shield against the inevitable. The ship's alarms screamed in unison, a cacophony of digital panic that matched the pulse hammering in Leora's temples. She felt the dreamscape's defenses probing at her mind again, like a persistent salesman who wouldn't take no for an answer. "Can we make a decision here, folks?" Finch called out, fingers tapping a relentless rhythm on the controls. "Because our window is closing and I don't fancy getting squished. Jax, you got a plan?" Leora asked, her grip on the controls as tight as her jaw. "We've got to find a way to exploit this," Jax replied, a strategist in his element even as the world fell apart around him. "If your flashbacks are what's keeping us from going full zombie, we need to replicate it." Brilliant, Arla deadpanned. "So we just need everyone to dredge up their deepest fears and traumas." "Easy." "Hey, if it works," Finch shrugged, the humor in his voice a fragile shard. "I mean, what's a little PTSD between friends?" Leora snorted, weaving the ship through another impossible gauntlet. "I knew I kept you all around for a reason." As the conversation continued, the ship broke free of the dreamscape's confines, the alien fortress receding behind them like a bad memory. But the reality of their situation was inescapable. They were cornered, hope dwindling to a flicker, and the enemy was relentless. Back at the resistance base, the atmosphere was a mix of exhaustion and defiance. The hangar bay felt like a sanctuary, the angular shadows and greasy metal welcoming them like an old friend. But there was no time for rest. The clock was ticking, and the galaxy's fate hung in the balance. Leora disembarked with the weight of the universe pressing on her shoulders. Jax was waiting, his expression unreadable, but she could see the gears turning in his mind. "Nice flying," he said, nodding towards the ship. "You might just have saved our hides." "Might," Leora echoed, the word a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. "We've got a lot of work ahead." Finch joined them, his smirk as irrepressible as ever. "So what's the plan, boss?" "Group therapy session." Jax chuckled, shaking his head. "Not quite. But we need to figure out how to weaponize whatever's keeping us from the subjugator's grasp. If we can disrupt their control, we might stand a chance." "Sounds like a long shot," Arla said, joining the huddle with a cup of something that smelled like battery acid. "But then, when have we ever had anything else?" "Exactly," Leora replied, a sardonic grin tugging at her lips. "We've beaten the odds before. What's one more impossible mission?" As they regrouped in the command center, the team pored over the data from the dreamscape, searching for a glimmer of understanding. The alien tech was a labyrinth of unfamiliar symbols and cryptic patterns, but if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was making sense of nonsense. "Look at this," Finch said, gesturing to a particularly stubborn string of code. "It's like they've got a failsafe in place, something that kicks in when their primary systems are under threat." "Failsafe?" Leora asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Yeah," Finch nodded, eyes intent on the screen. "It's like a panic button. If we can trigger it, we might just disrupt their whole setup." "Sounds risky," Arla pointed out, her skepticism a familiar comfort. "But then again, we're way past playing it safe." "Let's give it a shot," Jax decided, the determination in his voice a rallying cry. "We've come this far. We can't back down now." As they set to work, the atmosphere was electric with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The crew moved with the kind of urgency that came from knowing every second counted, their actions a testament to human resilience and defiance. "All right, people," Leora called out, her voice a beacon in the chaos. "Let's show these aliens what happens when you mess with the wrong species." Their laughter was strained, but real, a shared understanding that even in the darkest of Iors, they would not go quietly. They were humanity's last hope, an unlikely group of misfits standing against the tide of annihilation. And as they prepared for the next phase of their mission, Leora couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism. Because if there was one thing she'd learned, it was that humans were at their best when their backs were against the wall. "Here's to turning the tables," Finch said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast, "and to making these aliens regret ever underestimating us." "Cheers to that," Leora replied, her grin a defiant challenge to a universe that seemed determined to crush them. With renewed purpose, the team dove into the fray, ready to take the fight to the enemy. Because in a galaxy teetering on the brink of destruction, there was only one certainty: humanity would not go down without a fight. And as they moved forward, united in their determination and defiance, Leora knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because in the end, that was what made them unstoppable. The darkness might be closing in, but they were ready to light a fire that would burn brighter than the stars. The dreamscape creaked like an old man's knees, every groan a reminder that it was held together by little more than duct tape and wishful thinking. Leora Voss stood in the cramped cockpit, the neural interface buzzing away at the back of her skull like a mosquito that couldn't take a hint. She'd never thought she'd be grateful for the wartime horrors burned into her psyche, but hey, life was full of surprises. Like finding out your crippling PTSD could actually save your hide from alien mind control. Silver linings. "Leora, you look like you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with your mind," Finch said, not bothering to glance up from the control panel. "What's going on in that noggin of yours?" "Something useful, I hope." Leora rubbed her temples, trying to massage some semblance of order into the chaos. "Turns out being a mental train wreck has its benefits. The subjugator's mind tricks don't stand a chance against my own personal horror show." "Great. So your nightmares are finally good for something," Finch replied, tapping away at the flickering controls. "What's next?" "You gonna weaponize your childhood trauma too?" "Only if it comes with a matching set of luggage," Leora shot back. She turned to Jax, who was hunched over the battered holographic map like an overstressed accountant. "Jax, any thoughts on how we can leverage this mess?" Jax looked up, all cynical detachment and razor-sharp intellect. "Well, if your brain's a fortress of despair that the subjugator can't crack, maybe we can replicate that. Use our collective baggage to throw a wrench in their works." "Brilliant," Arla chimed in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "We'll just have a group sob fest and hope the aliens are allergic to human misery." "Hey, don't knock it till you've tried it," Finch said, smirking. "Our misery's got a hell of a kick." Leora nodded, grim determination etching lines into her features. "All right, we need to dial this up to 11. If we can find a way to project our emotional mess onto the dreamscape systems, maybe we can short-circuit their control, just like that." Arla asked, raising an eyebrow. "And here I thought you pilots needed to follow a procedure or something." "This is a procedure," Leora retorted. "The "we're screwed so let's wing it" procedure. It's a classic." The team gathered around, each of them bringing their own brand of pessimistic optimism to the table. The dreamscape's control room was a hive of activity, cables and wires spitting sparks like a high-tech Medusa having a bad hair day. "So, how exactly do we turn our psychological baggage into a weapon?" Finch asked, rubbing the stubble on his chin like it might help him think. "We need to amplify the neural interface," Leora explained, gesturing to the mess of circuits that passed for their control system. "Convert our emotional signatures into signals the dreamscape can emit. Think of it like broadcasting a radio wave of despair." "Sweet," Jax said, his voice a dry drawl. "We'll be the galaxy's first depression DJ," Finch chuckled, already working on the controls. "I always knew we had a future in broadcasting." Arla leaned against a console, arms crossed over her chest. "So we're going to fight aliens with feelings." "What's next? A therapy session at gunpoint? If it works, I'm all for it," Leora replied. "I'd rather fight with tears than die with regrets." The dreamscape shuddered again, a reminder that time was a luxury they didn't have. Leora focused on the neural interface, feeling the mental pathways open up like an old wound. "All right, team," Leora said, her voice steady. "Let's make these bastards regret messing with the wrong species." The others nodded, their expressions a mix of fatalism and resolve. They were gambling on an untested strategy, but then again, what part of their lives wasn't a gamble these days? "Broadcasting now," Finch announced, pressing a series of buttons that made the dreamscape hum with new energy. "Let's see if these aliens can handle a little human woe." As the ship shuddered and groaned, Leora felt the interface flare to life, her memories unfurling like a dark tapestry. The dreamscape systems absorbed the raw emotion, turning it into a weapon more potent than any blaster. The alien fortress loomed ahead, a monolithic structure of angles and shadows. Its defenses were formidable, but as the dreamscape's modified signals bombarded it, the fortress seemed to ripple, its impenetrable surface faltering. "Look at that," Jax murmured, awe-tinged with disbelief. "It's working. We're actually making headway." "Yeah, who knew our mental scars could be so effective?" Arla added, her voice laced with dark humor. "We're not out of the woods yet," Leora warned, her grip on the controls firm. "We've got to keep the pressure on." The dreamscape danced through space, its movements erratic yet purposeful, like a boxer dodging blows while dealing them in kind. The alien fortress fired back, but its assaults were unfocused, as if the dreamscape's emotional barrage had thrown them off balance. "Keep it up," Finch urged, his fingers flying over the controls with practiced ease. "We've got them on the ropes." Jax's eyes were glued to the holographic display. "If we can destabilize their central control, we might just have a shot at turning this around." "Let's give them hell," Leora said, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of chaos. Full power to the emotional broadcast, the dreamscape surged forward, every emotionally charged signal a punch aimed straight at the fortress's heart. The alien structure quivered, its once unbreakable facade beginning to crack under the pressure. "Looks like they're having a bad day," Arla remarked, a hint of satisfaction coloring her tone. "Hope they've got a good therapist," Finch quipped, his grin sharp as a knife. As the dreamscape's assault continued, the crew felt the tide shift, their desperation turning into determination. They were fighting back, not just surviving, and in the face of annihilation, that was a victory in itself. Suddenly, the holographic map lit up with new data, a series of coordinates flashing across the display. Jax leaned in, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Looks like we've hit something critical," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "There's a chain reaction in their main systems. If we keep pushing, we might just push them over the edge." "Let's finish this," Leora said, her eyes fierce with purpose. "All systems go. We're taking these bastards down." With the crew united in their resolve, the dreamscape unleashed its full fury, every ounce of pain, fear, and defiance channeled into a weapon of unimaginable power. The alien fortress trembled, its defenses unraveling under the onslaught. "We've got them," Finch crowed, his voice triumphant. "They are falling apart." "And not a moment too soon," Arla added, her cynical grin matching his. As the fortress began to disintegrate, Leora felt a surge of triumph. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide. But even as victory loomed, she knew the fight wasn't over. They'd bought themselves time, nothing more. "Prepare for withdrawal," Leora ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "We need to regroup and plan our next move." "Planning sounds like a great idea," Jax said, a wry smile on his lips. "Preferably somewhere that isn't exploding." With the alien fortress collapsing behind them, the dreamscape made its retreat, the crew savoring their hard-won success. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a start. As they regrouped back at the resistance base, the atmosphere was electric with the thrill of defying the odds. The hangar bay was a hive of activity, the crew moving with renewed purpose. "Nice work, team," Leora said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned respect. "We've shown them that humanity won't go down without a fight." "But we're not done yet," Jax reminded them, his eyes scanning the data they'd gathered. "We've got to figure out how to keep this momentum going." "Right," Finch agreed, uncharacteristically serious. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that the universe loves a good sequel. Great. Just what we need, Arla deadpanned. As if reality wasn't already a bad enough sci-fi series. As they pored over the data, the team found themselves united in a common purpose. They had a chance now, however slim, to take the fight to the aliens and make them regret underestimating humanity. We'll refine the process, Leora said, her mind already racing with possibilities. Turn our emotional resonance into a full-fledged weapon. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to level the playing field, Jax added, his voice steady with determination. The crew nodded, their resolve forged in the fires of adversity. They'd faced the darkness and refused to back down, proving that humanity's spirit was as indomitable as it was unpredictable. So, what's next? Finch asked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. We going to save the galaxy or what? One step at a time, Leora replied, her smile a testament to their shared struggles. But yeah, that's the plan. Together they prepared for the next phase of their mission, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in a universe that seemed determined to crush them, they were determined to fight back with everything they had. And as the dreamscape powered up, its engines humming with renewed life, Leora felt a flicker of hope amid the darkness. They were down, but not out. And as long as they stood together, they would face whatever came next with courage, defiance, and just a touch of reckless abandon. Here's to the next chapter, Finch said, raising an imaginary glass once more. Cheers to that, Leora replied, her grin a challenge to a universe that still had a lot to learn about human tenacity. With the crew united in their resolve, the dreamscape set course for the unknown, ready to light up the galaxy with the fire of their defiance. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about fighting with everything they had, against all odds, and they wouldn't have it any other way. The dreamscape hummed with the energy of a beast finally waking up from a long slumber, ready to charge. Leora stood at the helm, her fingers gripped around the controls like they were the only thing tethering her to sanity. Around her, the crew buzzed with a mix of nervous energy and grim determination. If they were going to take down the subjugator's defenses, it had to be now or never. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? Arla asked from her station, her voice dripping with sardonic cheer. Simple, Leora replied, eyes locked on the controls. We hit them where it hurts, right in the pride. They think they understand us, but they've got another thing coming. Jax leaned over the holographic map, a smirk playing on his lips. Plan A, exploit human unpredictability. Plan B, pray plan A works, and Plan C, Finch asked, his fingers dancing over the console, tuned in for any signs of impending disaster. Plan C is what we like to call screaming and running, Jax said with a dry chuckle. Charmed, I'm sure, Arla muttered, rolling her eyes. Really, it's like working with a team of stand-up comedians who hate their audience. Focus, people, Leora snapped, though her voice held more amusement than irritation. If we want to give these aliens a taste of human ingenuity, we need to use our emotional signals to fry their systems. Finch tossed her a wry salute, turning emotional baggage into a weapon. Therapy should be so effective. Yeah, well, desperation breeds innovation, Leora said. And God knows we're desperate. The dreamscape lurched as it accelerated towards the alien fortress, that foreboding mass of shadow and steel. The alien defenses were a tangled web of energy barriers and automated turrets, a nightmare for any sane pilot. Fortunately, sanity wasn't Leora's strong suit these days. All right, Finch, she called out, voice steady as a rock slide. Let's light them up. Finch nodded, his fingers blurring over the controls as he adjusted the dreamscape's broadcast frequencies, cranking the dial to full despair. Let's see if their circuits can handle a little human misery. The ship shuddered as the signal went out, waves of raw emotion rolling over the fortress like a tsunami of despair. Leora felt her memories, those jagged shards of her past, pulse through the neural interface. It was a vulnerable thing, putting herself out there, but vulnerability had never been her weakness. "Look at that," Arla said, pointing at the display. "Their defenses are flickering like a bad neon sign." Jax laughed, the sound sharp in the confined space. Guess they didn't read the manual on human unpredictability. The fortress's response was swift but scattered, its automated systems struggling to recalibrate in the wake of the emotional onslaught. It was like watching a seasoned boxer stumble drunkenly around the ring, unable to find its footing. "We need to keep the pressure on," Leora urged, her grip on the controls turning her knuckles white. "Finch, how's our emotional output? High enough to make a therapist blush," Finch replied, adjusting the power levels. "We're hitting them where it hurts and they don't know how to handle it." Jax nodded, his eyes glued to the holographic map. "Their central control is starting to destabilize. If we keep this up, they'll implode on themselves." Leora's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "Then let's give them a breakdown they won't forget." The dreamscape danced through the fortress's defenses, evading volleys of fire with a grace that belied its patchwork exterior. Each evasive maneuver was a calculated risk, but one Leora took with the cold certainty born from years of experience and a dash of madness. "Hey, Finch," Arla called over her shoulder. "Think they have a support group for aliens realizing their tech isn't as hot as they thought?" "Doubt it," Finch shot back. "But if they did, we'd just crash it too." The dreamscape surged forward, every emotionally charged signal a punch aimed straight at the heart of the alien system. The fortress shuddered under the strain, its once impenetrable facade cracking like an egg under a careless boot. "We've got them." Jax's voice rang out, loud enough to drown out the alarms. "Their defenses are collapsing." The crew erupted into a cacophony of cheers and relieved laughter, the tension in the air dissipating like morning fog under a harsh sun. Leora allowed herself a moment to savor the victory, the taste of it sweet on her tongue. But the battle wasn't over. The subjugators were nothing if not persistent, and the dreamscape had just painted a very large target on its hull. "Prepare for retaliation," Leora warned, her eyes scanning the displays. "They're not going to take this lying down." "Let them come," Arla said, her voice a defiant growl. "We'll teach them a thing or two about human resilience." As if on cue, the fortress retaliated, its remaining turrets spitting energy blasts with renewed vigor. The dreamscape danced through the chaos, its movements as unpredictable as the humans who piloted it. "Evasive maneuvers," Leora commanded, her hands steady on the controls. "Let's show them that adaptability isn't just a human trait, it's our greatest weapon." Finch nodded, his fingers flying over the console as he adjusted the ship's trajectory. "Time to make them regret underestimating us." The dreamscape zigzagged through the fire, dodging and weaving with a skill that bordered on the reckless. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, and Leora was determined to come out on top. "Jax, how's that chain reaction coming along?" she shouted over the din of the battle. Jax's grin was as sharp as a knife. "Their systems are in meltdown mode. One more push and they'll be toast." "Good," Leora replied, her voice a razor's edge. "Let's finish this." The dreamscape surged forward, every bolt of energy, every surge of human emotion directed at the fortress's core. The alien structure trembled, its defenses unraveling under the relentless onslaught. "We've got them on the ropes," Finch said, his voice exultant. "They are falling apart like a cheap suit." "And not a moment too soon," Arla added, her voice laced with satisfaction. As the fortress began to disintegrate, Leora felt a surge of triumph. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide. But even as victory loomed, she knew the fight wasn't over. They'd bought themselves time, nothing more. "Prepare for withdrawal," Leora ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "We need to regroup and plan our next move." "Planning sounds like a great idea," Jax said, a wry smile on his lips. "Preferably somewhere that isn't exploding." With the alien fortress collapsing behind them, the dreamscape made its retreat, weaving through the debris of their victory. The crew was silent, each lost in their thoughts, the adrenaline of battle bleeding away to leave a bone-deep exhaustion. As they regrouped back at the Resistance base, the atmosphere was electric with the thrill of defying the odds. The hangar bay was a hive of activity, the crew moving with renewed purpose. "Nice work, team," Leora said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned respect. "We've shown them that humanity won't go down without a fight." "But we're not done yet," Jax reminded them, his eyes scanning the data they'd gathered. "We've got to figure out how to keep this momentum going." "Right?" Finch agreed, uncharacteristically serious. "Because if there's one thing I know, it's that the universe loves a good sequel." "Great. Just what we need," Arla deadpanned. As if reality wasn't already a bad enough sci-fi series. As they pored over the data, the team found themselves united in a common purpose. They had a chance now, however slim, to take the fight to the aliens and make them regret underestimating humanity. "We'll refine the process," Leora said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Turn our emotional resonance into a full-fledged weapon. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to level the playing field," Jax added, his voice steady with determination. The crew nodded, their resolve forged in the fires of adversity. They'd faced the darkness and refused to back down, proving that humanity's spirit was as indomitable as it was unpredictable. "So, what's next?" Finch asked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "We going to save the galaxy or what?" "One step at a time," Leora replied, her smile a testament to their shared struggles. But yeah, that's the plan. Together they prepared for the next phase of their mission, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in a universe that seemed determined to crush them, they were determined to fight back with everything they had. And as the dreamscape powered up, its engines humming with renewed life, Leora felt a flicker of hope amid the darkness. They were down, but not out. And as long as they stood together, they would face whatever came next with courage, defiance, and just a touch of reckless abandon. "Here's to the next chapter," Finch said, raising an imaginary glass once more. "Cheers to that," Leora replied, her grin a challenge to a universe that still had a lot to learn about human tenacity. With the crew united in their resolve, the dreamscape set course for the unknown, ready to light up the galaxy with the fire of their defiance. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about fighting with everything they had, against all odds, and they wouldn't have it any other way. "Next time, let's try getting shot at without the whole life flashing before your eyes bit," Arla grumbled as she kicked back in the cramped cockpit, the seat creaking like an old man's knees. The adrenaline of battle had faded, leaving the crew with nothing but the bitter aftertaste of survival and a ship that was more duct tape than metal at this point. "Where's the fun in that?" Jack shot back, his grin as wide as a hyperspace jump. "I thought you liked living dangerously, dangerous, sure. Suicidal, not so much," Arla replied, rolling her eyes. "There's a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and I'd like to keep us on the right side of it." Leora, still at the helm, let out a sharp exhale, staring at the holographic map that flickered with the remnants of their recent assault. "We're alive, Arla. That's more than we can say for those subjugators and their overpriced fortress." "You mean their state-of-the-art death trap?" Finch chimed in, running diagnostics on the dreamscape's battered systems. "Looks like they forgot the warranty for emotional warfare. Guess they underestimated the power of human misery. Who knew our collective trauma would be our secret weapon?" Jax quipped, crossing his arms with a smug satisfaction. "I always knew this emotional baggage would pay off someday," Leora added dryly, adjusting the neural interface buzzing at the back of her skull. "It was like having a mosquito trapped inside your brain, but at least it drowned out some of the more unpleasant memories." As they coasted back to the Resistance's base, the hangar bay loomed into view, all angular shadows and greasy metal. It was comforting in its own grim way, a far cry from the slick, sterile hellscape of alien tech. "Home sweet home," Finch remarked as they entered the hangar, the dreamscape's engines whirring down with a tired sigh. "Looks like we made it back in one piece." "Well, mostly," Define one piece, Arla snarked, unbuckling her harness. I'm pretty sure the ship's held together by sheer force of will at this point. Good thing we're stubborn as hell then, Leora replied, standing up and stretching. Her muscles protested, but the familiar ache was a comfort in its own right. Pain meant you were still alive, still fighting. The crew filed out into the bustling hangar, their presence met with a mix of awe and disbelief by the ground crew. Whispers flew like bullets, fragments of their victory already morphing into legend. Looks like we've become local heroes, Jack said, his voice laced with sarcasm. What's next, a parade? Maybe they'll name a sandwich after us. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Leora cautioned, though a small part of her relished the idea. A victory sandwich did sound appealing after the hell they'd been through. As they moved through the base, the weight of their triumph settled around them like a well-worn coat. The subjugator's fortress was in ruins, and humanity had shown the galaxy that they weren't going to be pushed around. Leora, a voice called out, pulling her from her reverie. It was Sira, one of the Resistance's lead strategists, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. I heard about the mission. You really pulled it off, barely, Leora replied, her tone as dry as a desert planet. We got lucky. And lucky doesn't last forever. Maybe not, but it buys us time, Sira said, her eyes sharp with determination. Time to adapt. We've got a chance to turn their tech against them now. Oh joy. More alien tech, Finch said, unable to keep the sarcasm from his voice. Because the last time was such a breeze. Hey, at least we know they're not invincible now. Turns out they really can't handle a little human emotion, Arla added with a sardonic grin. Leora nodded, the wheels in her mind already turning. We'll need to figure out how to harness it properly, refine our approach. If we can use emotional signals to disrupt them, we might just have the edge we're looking for. Great, Jack said, clapping Leora on the back. Now we're weaponizing therapy sessions. What a time to be alive. The crew convened in the base's briefing room, a Spartan space filled with mismatched chairs and a table that looked like it had seen one too many brawls. Jack spread out the data they'd gathered from the fortress, the holographic map casting a ghostly glow over their faces. So, what's the plan? Finch asked, leaning back in his chair with a confidence that bordered on reckless. We gonna finish what we started, not quite yet, Leora replied, her voice steady. We need to regroup, understand what we've got here. This data is our chance to level the playing field. But we can't rush it. Right, Arla agreed, nodding. We play it smart. Let them think we're licking our wounds while we get ready to hit them where it hurts. Sounds like a plan, Jack said, though his eyes betrayed a wariness that spoke of battles yet to come. But what about the subjugator's tech? We can't exactly walk into their next fortress with nothing but good vibes. We adapt it, Leora said simply, her expression hard as steel. Learn from it, turn it against them. If there's one thing humanity's good at, it's making do with what we've got, like turning junk into a spaceship, Finch asked, a wry smile on his lips. Exactly, Leora replied, meeting his gaze. We've got a shot here, a real one. We just need to make it count. The crew spent the next few hours poring over the data, each of them lost in their own thoughts. It was a delicate dance, balancing hope and despair, victory and loss. But through it all, Leora felt a quiet determination taking root, one that refused to be extinguished. Hey, Leora, Arla said, breaking the silence. You okay? You've been staring at that map like it owes you money. Yeah, just thinking, Leora replied, shaking her head. We've come a long way, haven't we? Sure have, Arla agreed, leaning back in her chair. And we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. Damn right, Leora said, a small smile playing at her lips. We're just getting started. As the day wore on, the crew found themselves buoyed by a renewed sense of purpose. They were down but not out. And with every piece of alien tech they dismantled, every strategy they refined, they inched closer to the day when humanity would no longer be the underdog. Well, looks like we've got our work cut out for us, Jack said, stretching his arms above his head. Hope you're all ready for the long haul. Not like we've got much of a choice, Finch replied, a hint of mischief in his voice. Besides, it's not like we can let the galaxy have all the fun without us. The crew shared a laugh, the sound echoing off the cold metal walls. It was a moment of levity in a world that seemed hell-bent on crushing their spirit. But they weren't about to let that happen. "All right, team," Leora said, her voice carrying the weight of their shared struggles. "Let's get to work. We've got a galaxy to save." With renewed determination, the crew set about their tasks, each of them fueled by the fire of defiance and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Because in a universe that seemed determined to crush them, they were determined to fight back with everything they had. And as the dreamscape powered up once more, its engines humming with the promise of adventure, Leora felt a flicker of hope amid the darkness. They were down but not out, and as long as they stood together, they would face whatever came next with courage, defiance, and just a touch of reckless abandon. "Here's to the next chapter," Finch said, raising an imaginary glass once more. "Cheers to that," Leora replied, her grin a challenge to a universe that still had a lot to learn about human tenacity. With the crew united in their resolve, the dreamscape set course for the unknown, ready to light up the galaxy with the fire of their defiance. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about fighting with everything they had, against all odds, and they wouldn't have it any other way.